I'm Eva Oh, and this is the Teakink podcast. I've been a dominatrix since 2011, and I would like to spill the tea on my life. Thank you for listening. I am in Tokyo for a good time. I've been here for a couple weeks now, but yesterday I had a teakink event where I invited my three closest friends here, Chiaki, Mistress Chiaki, Lady Hinako, and Suzy Q. And we had a tea ceremony at, am I going to say this correctly? Yakumosario, I think. And it was beautiful, and it was so good to be with them again. But I always have a good time in Tokyo, and I thought I would take you through my discovery of it, the things that I've found, and what I think of it, because, I have the opinions. I first started coming to Tokyo when I was very young, about 8, to visit family, and I had no concept of the kink scene back then. That only really came through when I was visiting as a somewhat adult, when I was 18 or 19. And even then, I didn't really have the words to call it the kink scene. I understood that there was a heightened usage of sexuality in commonly seen popular culture and relaxation time. And by that, I mean that I knew there were these hostess bars, and now I know that there are host bars, and I knew that there were certain spaces. The first one that I ever heard of was something like a soap lounge or something, soap land, I think. And now I've seen some of these soap lands, and they don't seem quite as exciting as the story that was told to me. But the story that was told to me when I was 18, 19, and wanted to discover things more as an adult was that there was this space where it was a glass floor, and you could walk underneath it and watch these women bathing from sort of up above. So you could see things from the angle of looking up into their crotch, essentially. And I thought that the engineering and architecture of that was quite interesting. But also that there were spaces for voyeurism and engaging in the, I guess, unusual. Usually, perhaps when you think of that kind of a voyeurism, you might think of a peep show where there is blatant nudity, suggestion, suggestibility, sexual innuendo, but I didn't necessarily understand or think that bathing and the wetness of it was something to be sparked by. But now I understand that there are many possibilities. But did I find that when I came to visit when I was 18 or 19? No. Did I indulge in any of those particular venues then? No. When did I? I think the first time that I did was quite a few years into my dominatrix career. And I was visiting maybe about 5 or 6 years into my career. And I was finally researching with a pointed focus, and I found a Google map that does get updated, I'm not sure by who, called Map of Kinky Tokyo. And it outlines a lot of the sex shops, a lot of the venues, a lot of the hostess bars, and some play spaces. And I attacked it. I went to a lot of the stores, and I can't say that they spoke to my particular predilections. They are, a lot of the things are smaller, which I understand because of space constraints. So you're not going to have the large furniture that I'm very lucky to have, the dungeon furniture, but you do have some smaller pieces that are very beautifully crafted. Although now I understand that it's about word of mouth and private to private sort of deals that are happening when it comes to the one leather worker that I have been told about in Japan, because it's mostly about rope, or whether it's about, there's this incredible face harness that I've seen Mistress Chiaki use quite a bit, and I know that that is available directly through her friend who makes it. So there are much more niche makers as opposed to things that are more publicly available in the bigger stores in places like maybe even London or New York. And how were things when I first started to enter the awareness of the scene here? I went to the stores. I started to gather a few tools. I think I may have bought a braided whip, and maybe that was my main focus that I kind of remember the most. I wouldn't say that the vanilla things, such as the sex dolls or the masturbators, were of particular interest to me. I think that I am definitely more of a heavy bondage gear person, and that is maybe more something that the Germans are good at. So a place like Munich BoundCon is fun for me, but they were still very amusing and a cultural insight. However, I think the first time when it really sort of struck me as an experience was when I walked down into a Shibari club, and it was in Kabukicho in a basement. And I can't remember the name, or maybe it's not even around anymore. This was perhaps 6 or 7 years ago now. And dark, little narrow hallway. You have a little bit of a locker room for your things. And then you open up into a side door on the right, and this huge space, like really high ceilings. You would not have expected that from the tiny little hallway that you walked into. And a central stage, I can't remember, I think it was rounded. And and then a row or a few rows of these plasticky chairs around this rounded feature of a stage. And remnants or memories of kabuki, no. But perhaps. But so there was this stage, and there wasn't anywhere left to sit, and the front row was not particularly enticing to me. It was a bunch of older local men, and I decided to hang back with a friend and my partner at the time. And we hung back kind of against the wall. There were maybe 4 rows of seats, and the show begins. A little bit of light comes on, perhaps a little bit of smoke. Maybe I added that in my mind. It feels appropriate. And a man and a woman walk out in traditional-ish dress, kind of like a caricature of it. And the man begins to tie the woman. And she responds to every little pull of the rope in a very outlandish way to me, in a very emotive and almost anxiety-induced response to every little inch of this rope that clearly wasn't in a place yet to be hurting her. And I started to understand that perhaps there was an added campness to the Shibari performance in that particular space that I was not quite used to. And he begins to suspend her and splay her legs, and the men in the front row are reaching for themselves in through the darkness, and unfortunately I can still see. I hope everybody's having a good time, but I would rather have had less movement on the floor and more on the stage. And anyway, the melodramatics continue, very entertaining. And the stickiness of the chairs from the men's joy perhaps also increases. And there was a lot of cries out and a lot of loud emoting. And I had not yet been used to that. I think that when I was used to seeing Shibari done in the West, where it has traveled to, it is far more silent and less campy. And I wonder if that tells us about how emotion within sexualized or pain contexts are, perhaps. But that was quite a beautiful first welcome and experience. And I think on that same trip is when I met Chiaki for the first time. And I went to her studio and she was giving me a mummification. Yes, a mummification workshop. And there were many things about that particular thing that spoke to me. But the thing that stays with me and that still intrigues me is Chiaki herself. I would say that her skill is intense and full of focus, yet effortless humility. I am in awe of the person that she is and how she brings that into her craft. She is from the lineage of Naka Akira, who is a very important teacher here in Japan. And I have taken a couple of classes with her under Shibari also, but that first time was in mummification, and the precision of all the little parts and the protectiveness that she had over the body that was being wrapped and the perfection of the placement of each different type of wrap and the tape that encased the finality of it was perfection to watch, witness, and to be a part of. And I would say that that is probably a really lovely tone for who Chiaki is. And it was wonderful to see her again yesterday at the teakink event, and also Hinako and also Suzy Q. And I met them all for dinner. Yes, also that first trip. And I would say that my Japanese is very much non-existent, and their English has definitely become to a place where my Japanese will never be. And so, but back in those days, maybe also everyone was a bit shy. We didn't communicate as much back then, but now things flow more freely, and it's very sweet to engage with them. They're always so sweetly respectful to me. I think. In an appropriate to this culture way, but definitely an overwhelming way for me. They're always so kind in terms of how they share what they've gathered from my work. And I feel like I could do that more when it comes to their work. But I'm always very overwhelmed by their generosity. And yeah, perhaps this podcast is my way of sharing how much I adore them. But then we have Hinako, and Hinako practices kink quite differently also, actually. So the three of them have very different styles to each other, and it's beautiful to see the complementary nature of them. Hinako has a ridiculously incredible dungeon space, 3 floors in the middle of Tokyo, and the bottom floor is essentially a storage to her obsessions. Just gear, and latex everywhere. And then on the first floor, it's a lot of inflatables and suspension areas, everything super white and clinical. And then the wired stairs take you up to the top where there's a Shibari tatami room and an isolation cell, and it's all very, very impressive and always very fun. And I would say that Hinako's approach is the absurd. The super fun and absurd. And then we have Suzy, who is just the most focused and gentle, and divine creature. um, it's harder for us to communicate because I don't speak any Japanese, and I think the other two definitely overtake conversations when it comes to English. But what I've always gathered is such a darling sweetness about Suzy, and it's always wonderful to share space with her. And I can never stop looking at her hands also. Her hands are magnificent. And I know that of her feet also. But we don't see the feet on the tea table that often. But yeah, it was a lovely time. I always enjoy a tea ceremony, and it's wonderful to be back in Tokyo. I didn't get to go to that Shibari club that I mentioned, or even if I know that it exactly exists, but I did get to go to, I do have a hostess bar that I really enjoy here called Black Heart, and there's a I guess a hostess who works there called Ren, who speaks English and is always very, very accommodating to me and my slave. And it's a beautiful, all dark red, cozy, very well lit space that is quite large for a Tokyo basement. And along one wall, there's all of this plush leather seating, and there's a dark bar with these two very, very professional and reserved bar staff. And there's a tiny library, a cage, a few displays with sex dolls in them, and a wall full of Hajime Sorayama's work, because I think he actually goes there. And you should really look up his work if you don't know it. It's kind of a sci-fi experience of women in a bondage world. Incredible. But I remember I went in the first time and I sat under it, and I was just felt like I was in an iconic space. But I would say that it's less like what we are maybe used to in the West in terms of a play party. It's definitely not a play party. It's something where you go and your drinks are included in the entrance fee, and you chit chat with these very eloquent and gracious hostesses, and you can engage with them in some light play as well as with the people that you're with quite freely. And it's a very community vibe. I've been there when some people just drop in from the community on their own just to socialize. And yet it's still decorated, as in it's quite beautiful. And so I wish that there was something like that in London or in New York. And I mean, there are spaces that definitely have their own incredible charm that I'm very happy for in London, such as Club Verboten, and in New York, that are more like sex clubs kind of / living rooms. But yeah, space kind of more like this hostess SM bar thing that they have here. I would love to drop in on that often. It's kind of classy. I'm all for the nasty, but a little class every now and then is nice. And what else has Tokyo shown me? I'm reminded of a time I have a tattoo. So I can't really use the onsens here. So there's a legacy of tattoos being associated with the gangsters here, and that being still correlated in a negative connotation. And so just traditionally, they're not necessarily welcome in some spaces, especially when they can be seen very openly, such as the bathhouses. And so I have to go quite far out to find the bigger onsens that are accepting of that. And there are some small ones in town, but I'm reminded of this man I once met here. It was very, very random and sweet, just messages me on one of the channels, and we end up sort of very haphazardly negotiating a bit of play with my zero Japanese and his limited English. And I meet him at this hotel, and we get chatting a little bit, and he starts to undress himself, and he's completely covered in tattoos. Completely. Yeah. Except for maybe his dick. There is ink everywhere. And from my knowledge, when you're doing that style of work, it's usually the tap style, which is a lot more laborious. And so I have no idea how much time that would have taken. And it was like a fine interaction. It wasn't particularly sexy, sorry if you're listening. Even though he thought it was. But the most memorable part of that interaction was that as he had undressed and he stood in front of me and he looked at me, asked, like, waiting for instruction, the thing that he said, I mean, we had already negotiated at this point, the thing that he said, to reiterate, was no pain. And I mean, I had understood that was the case from our negotiation, but I had not yet seen his myriad of tattoos. And it's still just hilarious for me to think that this heavily pain experienced human being was so adamant in this final moment of stepping into surrender that this be the well-known fact. And I guess that just speaks to ability versus motivation versus context. But yeah, no pain. No pain man has reached out to me again, but not interested. A very cute story to remember. And what else have I done on this trip? I went to a couple of rope bars where people go and do a salon, and they also just hang out and meet, eat sushi. They take away sushi and like drink. And it's really tiny, tiny, tiny little rooms, maybe like 12 square meters. And there's two of them right next to each other. I think it's called Umu, and I can't remember the name of the other one. They're also in Kabukicho. And you pay an entrance fee similar to that of the Hostess bar, but with much less decoration. And they have some gear on the walls. You can bring your own rope, and everyone sits in very close proximity. And considering how many people I've seen in those rooms, it is deathly quiet. It's so chill. But really calming, and there's snacks on the bar top. I think I had a ginger cookie or something like this, and it's all very wholesome, and it feels wonderful. Yeah. And obviously, as somebody who doesn't speak Japanese, I'm entirely a tourist through and through. It doesn't matter how many times I've been here. It's ridiculous how zero Japanese I know. I think for me, it's because I understand the level of, it's like me in some video games. I just don't even bother, and I kind of watch the people who really know how to do it, because I understand that there is such a learning curve, and for me to get to that end point that I would like to be at, it would take a lot of work and time and effort. And I think I used to have a perfectionist issue. Now I definitely don't have that anymore. Now I think I'm just lazy. So I gravitate towards the kind English-speaking hostesses and bring a Japanese friend, and I will make an effort. I think maybe once the TV projects are settled a little bit more, and once the AI project is settled more, I think maybe I'll spend more time here, and in which case I will make more of an effort, promise. Yeah, so it's been a very lovely trip, and those were the main kink things that I got up to, I think. I've also been on other trips to a couple of play spaces here. One that's always open, easily accessible, is a love hotel called Alpha Inn, which is, I don't know the name of the area exactly. It's right next to one of my favorite bars called Gen Yamamoto, which is a cocktail omakase bar. But we're not talking about that on this particular podcast. We're going to talk about the Love Hotel and Alpha Inn. You can go in, I think, anytime. I think it might be 24 hours. And there is somebody at a little kiosk, and you kind of choose which room you want, whatever's available. And it is mostly red and tile, like brown tile. And a few spaces that have bars, and there's like a literal like PVC horse type spanking horse situation that actually has the horse head on it. There's a lot of unusual things, and they're traditional Japanese squatting toilets. But I think the most interesting quirk of this space is that I think they still do this, is that if you leave your door open, you are welcoming other people to come and play with you, which I think is quite a nice communal aspect of it that I'm not aware of in many other Love Hotels. There's also some other studios that you can hire. I forget exactly what the configuration of the number is, 1048 maybe. Studio, anyway, maybe I'll list it. It's on Google Maps as a photography studio, but I really like that space because it's a little bit more my color scheme. So the grays and the metals and a little tiny bit of wood, not too much. And there's a very heavy suspendable cage, and also a proper cell that you can fit sort of a futon size little bed in, and there's an actual double bed with maybe PVC sheets, I think, from memory, and a nice rig for Shibari against a wall, and a fucking swing also. So it's like all your essentials and in a minimalist space, and you can hire it overnight. And it's entirely private also. It's not like a Love Hotel situation. It's literally in maybe a residential / office area and in its own little corner. Very, very quiet. Yeah. What else have I been up to in my Tokyo times? I mean, have I seen many of the vanilla sexuality things? I mean, I've been into a lot of the sex stores, and the sex dolls are quite interesting for me to observe. I think I'm very interested in the idea of them being a presence in our culture, in our operations. But the fact that a lot of them look quite prepubescent here is interesting for me to navigate. What are my current thoughts around that? How do I believe that it is best that prepubescent ideas of sexual engagement are engaged with in these inanimate objects? Do I believe that it's a better option for those who do have that predilection? Do I believe that they need to come with other support systems and conversations around that? I would say that it is a very murky area that I haven't had great conversations or very in-depth conversations about, and I would like to. Am I going to do that on this podcast? Maybe it's its own topic. But yeah, I would say go and have a look and let it be a conversation as a starting point. But yes, so there are a lot of things that are available to access quite publicly, despite the conservative nature of engagement that I have also noticed here. And why might that be? I mean, we have these theories of repression, oppression, inspiring the inverse, right? We also have maybe just legacies of culture that are more creative and indulgent of sexuality as entertainment, perhaps. So I think that those are probably some aspects to take on board in mind when engaging with all of these really fun options that are available here. Is there anything that I'd like to do more of the next time that I come back? A part of me thinks that it would be nice to meet more other workers, other mistresses, but I'm also very much like a creature of habit in some ways, and I like my crew. But I actually have never been to a party here. Yeah. Like the Department H or the Torture Garden, Tokyo, even. So maybe I'll aim for the time of year or month when that actually happens next time. And maybe I'll ask Hinako if she will take me out to this new PVC like wonderland that has been opened outside of Tokyo where everyone dresses up in latex and PVC animal costumes. So there are options. There are options. But yeah, I'm very lucky that I get to see all of these things. And I think that my curiosity and resourcefulness and the energy that I have behind those things is what pushed me into things. And now I can afford to be a bit lazy and enjoy the goodness of what I have access to, right? But yeah, just a little sharing as I exit Tokyo this trip. And for those of you who are visiting, look up the things that I've had a look at. Maybe let me know what you think of them. Let me know if you find anything more. And yeah, Teakink Tokyo. I look forward to my next installment. Thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.